I promise you guys a sequel. So if you haven't seen the original video, make sure to watch it right now. So I wanted to give you guys an example of a pretty good experiment and a not so good experiment. I kept these studies for a reason, man. I knew one day I would find a way to explain why, when I was in college, I loved making fun of psychology students, etc. So let's look at a slightly better study. This still has its issues, but let's celebrate it for what it's trying to do. Pluralistic ignorance and alcohol use on campus. Some consequences of misperceiving the social norm. This was 1993, and this was done at a college. So the first question you might ask is, what is pluralistic ignorance? And this is something that's important. It's a great finding from psychology that's worth exploring. Pluralistic ignorance happens when there's a perceived disconnect between your own attitudes and what you perceive as the attitudes of a group or community. So since this is a study about alcohol drinking on campus, the pluralistic ignorance is investigating whether there's a difference between what every individual student personally thinks about how much alcohol to drink. Is it acceptable, not acceptable? Is that the only way to have fun? And what they think the school, the broader campus, thinks on the same issue. The key to pluralistic ignorance is that there's an information problem. If you knew exactly how every single person felt, then you wouldn't perceive something different than what every single person is feeling. So why do I like this study so much? Because of its scope. It is not trying to generalize to the general population. It's literally just exploring alcohol use on campus. It knows what it's trying to study. So now that we've established its scope, we can then look at the sample size and see if the sample size and the method of sampling is appropriate or appropriate enough. Study 1, subjects were 132 undergraduates who voluntarily attended a mass testing session. There were 69 women and 63 men, with approximately even distribution of women and men across the first through fourth year classes. Study 2, subjects were 243 undergraduates who voluntarily attended a mass testing session. There were 145 women and 97 men, approximately even distribution of women and men and across all college years. Study 3, 52nd year undergraduates, equal distribution of men and women. And that's it. For those of you who are really into experimental design or really into statistics, you know there's still an issue with this, right? Whenever people volunteer to do something, that's a sampling bias. That's not random, right? That's a selection bias. And on top of that, at least one of the studies, it didn't find college students from every year. Beyond that, of course, even if there was an even more representative sample than what we get here, how much can you generalize to all colleges, right? There's community colleges, there's HBCs. This was done at Princeton, I believe. So non-Ivy League colleges, state schools, they're all very different. What about Catholic colleges? So parochial colleges, I believe they're called. So there are problems, right? There are problems generalizing even to every college. Why I don't dog on this too much, why I don't attack this too much is, at least in its title, it's telling you, it's talking about campus. It's talking about campus. How much they apply their findings to whatever population fits what they're trying to do. They're not going too above and beyond and trying to generalize this to more. I'm giving this a lot of credit despite the fact that it still has sampling issues. But for psychology, this is really good because at least the scope of their findings and who they're trying to apply to, they're clearly limiting it to undergraduates on campus. So now let's look at a really bad one. Let's look at one that can't even fit my very loose benefit of the doubt type of critique. All right, be prepared for cringe, people. 1974 study. So this phenomenon of the social sciences not really respecting actual experiment methodology and statistics, gone on for a long time. This one actually probably has been cited a lot in policymaking and general perceptions of where we are in this world. Before I get ahead of myself, let me just read the title and I'll read the abstract and you will kind of understand what I'm talking about. The nonverbal mediation of self-fulfilling prophecies in interracial interaction. So this deals with that capital R word. 2 experiments were designed to demonstrate the existence of a self-fulfilling prophecy mediated by nonverbal behavior in an interracial interaction. The results of experiment 1, which employed naive white job interviewers and trained white and black job applicants, demonstrated that black applicants received A, less immediacy, B, higher rates of speech errors, and C, shorter amounts of interview time. Experiment 2 employed naive white applicants and trained white interviewers. In this experiment, subject applicants received behaviors that approximated those given either the black or white applicants in experiment 1. The main results indicated that subjects treated like the blacks of experiment 1 were judged to perform less adequately and to be more nervous in the interview situation. The subjects treated like the whites. The former subjects also reciprocated with less proximate positions and rated the interviewers as being less adequate and friendly. The implications of these findings for black unemployment were discussed. Let me show you the sample size. Let me show you the experiment design. Subject interviewers were 15 white Princeton males recruited to participate in a study of group decision-making conducted. So 15 Princeton men. Study 2. 30 white male Princeton University students were recruited ostensibly to help career services train interviewers. Do you guys see the glaring problem in this experiment design? Just 15 people and they're a specific type of person. I get it, this was the 70s, you didn't have as many women working as now. I'm sure there were Hispanic people and black people and Asian people working back then, right? I'm just giving you all these things to think about because do 15 Princeton educated men represent your average interviewee or your average interviewer when you're a baby until you're a senior? How many Princeton educated men do you even stumble on every day? I'm serious. Not too many, right? I mean, before you discovered my channel, how many Ivy League people do you even know? To go to Princeton, you're a specific type of social economic class usually already. Princeton itself shapes you in a certain way, so there's a culture involved in that. And even to get into Princeton, you were probably of a certain mentality, of a certain culture on top of that. This is the problem with what we talked about in the last video, a convenient sample. If you're gonna try to generalize to something, which this study, unlike the previous study we were looking at, was trying to generalize more to the broader world, right? This is trying to talk about workplace and job interviews. You can't use a convenient sample. There's a critical thinking lapse there. It logically doesn't follow. I'll give you a funny analogy just to illustrate if you don't see what I'm saying. Let's say we wanted to study how a tribe in the Amazon works. We pick 15 people like me who go to University of Pennsylvania and we sort of like simulate certain behaviors that we associate with certain behaviors that people in rainforests do. And then we derive all these conclusions based on studying 15 people like this guy who went to an Ivy League. Are those findings at all applicable to the people we were trying to study, the people who growing up in a rainforest? It's a really funny, weird analogy, but I hope you see that beyond just sample size, the sampling method is very, very important. If you can't make it representative, you have to get it as random as possible. And there's also something called blind. There's a lot of things to experiment design that I'm not going to discuss in this video because we're trying to just break down a fundamental issue one at a time. This is talking about some deep stuff, probably HR decisions, hiring decisions, policy decisions, maybe even laws were made, and your sample size is 15 people. You did the study on 15 people. So like we did last video, Ivy League school, man. Ivy League school. And no understanding, or even worse, blatant ignoring of basic experiment design, basic science. So that's my spiel for today. I guess I was meant to make more videos on this subject. I thought that first one was enough, but man, I dug up more studies. So the more studies I dig up, the more we're going to explore this. Some of these issues with psychology, behavioral economics, the soft sciences, they've gone mainstream, man. Everyone's been talking about it. And many of us saw this 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It just, for me, I didn't know the implications. I didn't realize that if the top of society lacked so much critical thinking, how much it would filter down. Look at where our society is. I'm still hopeful. That's why I came back to make videos again on YouTube. The seeds were planted many years ago. Leave your comments. So this is my syllabus for social psychology that I kept all these years from college. I knew I was going to use this one day. And basically what it says is there's a mandatory research requirement for all students. Mandatory research requirement for all students. Participate in 4 experimental sessions of a single hour. Now, since it's 4 times 1 hour, right? So you need 4 hours total. Not all of the studies you can take part in are an hour each. So you have to break it up. So what usually ended up happening was some of those survey studies we saw from my analysis, maybe they would count for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So you would have to accumulate and add up. It's not like all of us did 4 experiments. Many of us did 8 or 10 because again, not all of them took an hour. So what would happen is sometimes during class, when students got bored, they would go on the experiment website and fill out surveys because surveys, let's say, could give you half or a quarter of a credit. I took this class because I was passionate about the social sciences. I've always been passionate about the social science, but many kids were taking it just to get a credit over with, whether for a major requirement or for a general requirement. If you're following my gist, most of the subjects in these experiments are not the best subjects. They don't care. They don't know how to be a good subject. A lot of them are filling out questionnaires and doing stuff, multitasking, double tasking. Lots of bad incentives for students to, for lack of a better word, BS. This is the state of experimental design in social psychology, people. One time I remember I went to a session. It was one of those, it was going to take an hour. And the person never even showed up. Either the grad student or this professor, she never showed up. I still remember her name. And yeah, I was given the credit, but I don't know what they did with my results because I technically showed up. Would I have counted as an N? Like, would I have counted as one of the experimental subjects? Or would they have tossed me out because I never even did the experiment? I showed up, but they didn't show up. Lots of questions, man. Lots of questions. And you could get out of the research requirement by, you could read a research article and write a 4-page double-spaced paper about it. I actually like writing papers now, but at that phase of my life, I definitely didn't enjoy writing papers. So I don't think anyone in any of these psychology courses wrote a paper. They just said, you know what, let's take part in the experiments. Let's get it out of the way. Let's just be your not so good experimental subjects because again, we're forced to. Convenience sampling, everything we've established before.